Hello and welcome to a new podcast from the Beldant Road Institute in Sweden. I'm Hussein Askary, board member of the Beldant Road Institute in Sweden. Today is April 3rd, and it's Easter time, so wish all of our Christian friends a happy, and their families a happy Easter. Today we're going to do some sort of a ceremony, some sort of a funeral for a narrative, a false narrative, which is called the death trap narrative. And hopefully we'll be able to bury it once and for all. So we go on doing real work and real business, because this death trap narrative has been touted for several years now against the Belt and Road Initiative and China. And as we have discussed, but we will discuss more today, there is no basis for that narrative. So to discuss that, we have with us today from Pakistan, Mr. Shakeel Ahmad Ramay. He's director of the China Center Director in the Pakistani Belt Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Welcome, Shakeel.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, and hello to everybody.
And we also have with us today Mr. Dennis Small from he's the Ibero-American Affairs Director in the American Magazine Executive Intelligence Review. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, Hussein. Very nice to be with you. My pleasure.
We're happy that you took the time to be with us today to discuss this, and hopefully we'll not discuss this issue anymore. We will discuss more interesting things, more constructive things in the future. But the reality of it's now generally discredited, even by institutions in the West, as we will come here. But there was a reason for sending out this false narrative, and as we will show you where it comes from originally, in order to discourage nations from working with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. But it has not worked really, because more and more nations have joined the Belt and Road Initiative. Now there are more than 140 nations, mostly developing nations. They have not been scared by this story, but there is a public opinion, even in those countries, created by this narrative. I want to share with you some of my own observations about where it really came from. I and my colleague Jason Ross, who we worked together at the Schiller Institute, and we actually worked on the book Extending the Silk Road to West Asia and Africa. But we also took note of this when this story started spreading all over the Western media. So we were among the first. In August 30, we published this article, Why China's Death Book Diplomacy is a Hoax, because we looked at certain facts. We looked at where this story comes from, and we came to the conclusion that this is just another fake news item. The problem is that it spread so much, as usual, when you repeat a lie too often and by very big institutions in the media and the mainstream media, it becomes a fact. At the time, we looked at this, the big story about the Sri Lankan port of Hambantota, but also we took a case study of the Pakistani situation, the death situation, and what is China's role or not role there. But since we are having Shakeel with us today, I'm not going to discuss the Pakistan aspect. Shakeel will do that. But I want to just go through where this story came from. Some people say it was some Indian think tank which started this using the term death book diplomacy. But in reality, what the real campaign was started by the US State Department. There was this report published in May, but it was it's called the Death Book Diplomacy. It was written by two authors, Sam Parker, Gabriel Shepitz. They were studying allegedly in the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School. So it sounds like this is an academic report based on facts, scientific methods, and so on and so forth, but that's not really true, as we investigated the case and the people who wrote it. So when we looked closer at the time in the report itself, the report said at the bottom that this report was commissioned by the State Department of the United States, which means that the State Department ordered this from these authors and paid for it, and obviously outlined what they want out of this report. So the report was written by this gentleman, Sam Parker, and Gabriela Chepitz, and was sent back to the State Department. And then the State Department sent it out to all the international media in the middle of May 2018. And that's why how it spread all over the place. Now, that small thing about that this report was commissioned is removed from the current version. But we have eyewitnesses, as I will show, who at the time, major Western media who said this report was really commissioned by the State Department. But let's just take a look at the authors of the report to show that these people have nothing to do with economics or financial studies, and they did not really care much about looking at the documents, the contracts of all these projects China is building in all these countries, where the credit comes from, how it is used, what is the amount. No, the only thing they care about that this is the Belt and Road Initiative is a security threat for the United States, and China is using these credits, these projects to increase its power over nations and over the oceans, especially with ports and sea lines, and that's a big threat to the United States. Now, Sam Parker is actually, at the time he was studying, now he received a master's degree, but he was working in the US Department of Homeland Security as a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs. So he comes directly from the security establishment. And before that, he was working at the Queens District Attorney's Office, Special Victims Bureau, and assisted with message development for It's On Us campaign against campus sexual assault as a White House intern, and so on and so forth. This person, he has never written anything about economics, about finance, about anything. This is a post 9/11 institution which only deals with security matters. We have Gabriela Chepitz, the co-author too, and she also comes from the similar background. She served as a research assistant for the project on the Middle East peace process at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. That's a neoconservative think tank. Previously, she spent a year at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as a legislative intern covering the Middle East, and was interned with the Department of Defense, working on US security policy towards the Gulf states. So doesn't even have worked on Asian matters, let alone economics, finance, and so on and so forth. So the reason I say I have eyewitnesses who reported that this was a US State Department. This is from an Indian newspaper. This was May 23. So if you look on Google and the depth book diplomacy term, all the results are after May 12. So all the reports about the depth, that was after the State Department released this report. So they say this US State Department has a report commissioned by it and made public recently, has warned that China is offering blah, blah, blah. This is the Guardian, a well-known British mainstream. Also, it says that the report was independently prepared for the State Department. We even have a CNN report. So it's not difficult to find it, but if you go to the report today and check it on the Kennedy School, it doesn't say it was commissioned by the State Department. So anyway, the point is that what this report says is that, first of all, China is using the Belt and Road to manifest its military power globally. And that's a big threat to the United States and its allies. The other thing they say is that they talk about, of course, they pick up certain examples of countries who actually already in debt, but then they say The problem they have with their debt burden is because of these projects built by China. And the authors of this report, they say specifically that we will make the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka the template. That's what they say. So they say, we will copy this example, what we write here, and send it all over the world and say, look at Hambantota, look at Sri Lanka. That's the example. And then, as we have learned later, that there is no basis for the fact that the Hambantota port constructed by a Chinese company and then leased to a Chinese company had anything to do with a debt trap or whatever. Now, the real, besides us, there were others who wrote extensively on the fact that the debt trap is a myth. This is the Chatham House. They are no friends of China. They had this published last year, a long report with very interesting conclusions. It's called Debunking the Myth of the Debt Trap Diplomacy. We had a more interesting person, Mrs. Deborah Brautigam. She works at the Center for Advanced Asian Studies at the Johns Hopkins University. I have followed her for several years now. I even read a couple of her books on China and Africa. She has the most extensive materials on the reality of the debt situation in Africa, economic situation in Africa. And she already in 2018 said that all the talk about the debt trap for African nations is not true, because we looked at the numbers and China owns only 17% of every country's debt in Africa. The rest of the debt is owned by international multilateral institutions, IMF, World Bank, but also the Paris Club and other Western lenders. Anyway, I mean, this is in the Atlantic. That Atlantic is no friends of China, but the article says the Chinese debt trap is a myth, using the same formula. But the difference with Mrs. Brautigam's work and her associate author, Rittmeyer, is that she went through thousands of documents from the Sri Lankan authorities. They talked to Sri Lankan officials, and I have to maybe stop sharing. And her conclusion, and also the Chatham House conclusion, was that, first of all the projects China is building, they are not designed or planned by China. China goes to a country which asks the Chinese companies to help build their own national parts of their national plan. Like this Hambantota port was part of a Sri Lankan national development plan for the post-Civil War period, because Sri Lanka lived a bloody, terrible, destructive civil war for many, many years. And getting out of that, it had to invest in infrastructure to develop its economy. Now, the Hambantota port, the feasibility study was conducted first by a Canadian consulting company, which said that this port is a feasible project, but Canadian companies should hurry up and be co-contractors in building it, because this is going to be very important, because Hambantota port lies just a few nautical miles from the busiest maritime trade route on the planet. All the shipping between Europe and Asia and Africa passes by the southern tip of Sri Lanka. So the Canadian company said, this is a very lucrative thing. It has a great promise. And then that was in 2005. In 2007, a Danish consulting company also did a feasibility study, and they said this is a very important project. The Sri Lankan government went to India and the United States to get help building this port and other projects, but they were denied that help. So when the Sri Lankans opened it for bidding, the Chinese thought this is a good idea. They looked at the feasibility study conducted by Western consulting companies and said, we can do this project. Now, Sri Lanka's problem started later when the port was already built, but as usual, infrastructure doesn't give you massive amounts of money back. When infrastructure, the purpose of infrastructure is to enable the productive economy to move forward inside the country. You do not generate a lot of cash from building infrastructure. But anyway, the Sri Lankan government following the war got into a debt trap because it needed credit, both for its fiscal problems, but also for parts of its reconstruction plan. So it started borrowing in the international bond markets. So it started floating national sovereign debt in the international debt markets for 8% and so on interest. And that got accumulated a huge amount of debt. So according to the authors of these other articles and reports I mentioned, what they say is that what happened is that the Sri Lankan government in 2017 was in a deep financial crisis, and the Sri Lankan government asked China for help to get extra cash. So they offered to lease the port and sell part of the ownership to a Chinese company, China Harbor Company. And the Chinese, who had extended the $1.1 billion credit line from the Exim Bank of China, they said, no problem, we can help you put in an equal amount of money to help you with your financial problems. The money was not used to pay back the debt to China. It was used to strengthen the Sri Lankan finances to pay its debt to the international creditors. So in reality, what these two reports say, China helped Sri Lanka pay back its debt to Western creditors. And that's based on many documents and facts. So the other thing which these reports show that, and other studies, is that the Chinese, unlike international creditors, when a nation defaults on its credit, unable to pay back, they don't put sanctions and additional expenses on them, as the Paris Club does, for example. They try to reschedule the debt. Sometimes they forgive part of the debt, and so on and so forth. So these things are now becoming clear, but what we are trying to do is that to show, I mean, people can go to read these reports, but also have a final say on why this narrative is completely false, why it is not an economic and financial, based on economic and financial studies, it's based on pure geopolitical security studies. And the authors of this narrative know very little about the Belt and Road Initiative, very little about Chinese economic policy, and about the nations they say are in debt trap. So anyway, I stop here, and I would like to, as I said, in 2018, we took Pakistan as a case study, but today we have Shakeel. He's one of the most prominent experts on the China-Pakistan economic corridor. He has written a book on China, Understanding China, the book is called. And please, Shakeel, let us see this whole story from your side, from your country.
Thank you, Hussein, for making job easier for us. I think Dennis will also agree with me. You very eloquently put the all the evidences to bury this wrong narrative, and I hope Dennis will do the rest. I will talk more about China debt relief diplomacy, because when I look at that, so how China is moving forward, I will share my presentation. So China debt relief diplomacy. There is one notion, so that say it's a debt trap, but I believe this is a debt relief. Why? I will share one or two slides which will be used as a context of this. You can say this claim. First of all, when we look at that infrastructure gap in the world, that is being done by MGI, McKinsey Global Investment. They told us from 2016 onward, 2040. So there was a $15 trillion gap. The thing to keep in mind is it was only done for 56 countries. If you look at the number of the countries, which are around 200, from that they took a sample of 56 countries and they said, so try investment, what would be that investment gap? That is a $15 trillion. And this investment is being calculated by using the 7 sectors. And the business as usual, the way we are moving towards, and it was calculated by following the predictions or the forecast of GDP development in the coming years by International Institute. The last thing which I want to mention is that, so there is a debt, $234 trillion, which is 317 of a global GDP. That is a global debt. It came from the International Financial Institute. In the 2018, they said in 2016 there was $234 trillion debt of the world. So that's me, by putting in the context, my first slide says, there is a debt on the world, and the debt belongs to, we know that Dennis will talk more about it. So to whom? So these are the Western institutions, or we can say all the Bretton Woods institutions. It belongs to, most of the parties belongs to them. The next slide. So UN report. So they also, one report by UN, they were talking about the Sustainable Development Goal till 2030. What they came for? So why infrastructure is needed? They say 1%, $1 investment will bring back 20% rate of return on the investment if we are putting investment on infrastructure. Second, they say if that investment reduce the travel time, and that investment improve the access to electricity, if that investment enhance the broadband connectivity, because the broadband connectivity is very important in this world right now, because we're living in the era of the digital economy. So digital economy, the broadband connectivity is very important. And it moves towards higher productivity and expansion of the economy. If these 5 indicators are being met, as mentioned by the UN report, if these 4 indicators are being met, that's mean the world will be benefiting. At the ratio of $1 investment, return will be 20%. That's mean, so it will enhance the welfare of the people, it will reduce the poverty, and it will lead to the better life in the future. This is the context on the basis of which I try to analyze Chinese investment across the world. Either they are meeting this criteria or not, one thing, and second thing. Then I try to analyze the investment which is being made by China is contributing towards the revenue expansion of the countries. Either they are working to expand the economy, reducing poverty, and bringing in a new opportunity for the economy. Then I look at the Beldant Road Initiative. The World Bank conducted 3 studies that were published in 2019. They pointed out that the investment in infrastructure will reduce the travel time by 20% in BR countries, and more interestingly, 3% in the non-BR country. So the benefit is for the both. The first criteria is being met as has been defined by UN. Second, the trade will increase by 2.7 to 9.7% in BR countries, and 1.7 to 6.2% in the non-BR countries. Real income, that is very interesting, will increase by 1.2 to 3.4%. Real income means they took the prices of the 2014, the dollar prices of the 2014. They predicted up to 2030. So this will be, you can say this will be the revenue or the benefit of the project. But also keep in mind one thing. These projections were made being by using on the little bit more than the 500 billion investment by the China till 2050, 2015 or 16. So it was not the, you can say the all investment has been made by the China, or the calculations are not based on the original design of the BRI up to 2030, when the investment will be around about $8 to $9 trillion. So then it will also add up $930 billion to the global GDP up to 2030. And the last thing they will do, poverty reduction. It will bring out 7.6 million people from the extreme poverty and 32 million people from the moderate group. And the major beneficiary of those investments would be developing country, least developed country, and the poor country, where it is much, where it is needed. So if we look at the context, and the BRI. So that's mean, so BRI investment or the Chinese investment, they are helping the world. They are through the trade, they're bringing the new economic opportunity. Through the travel time reduction, saving the cost and the time. That is more, both are the very precious. And then the real income. That will be a real game changer because the people are facing the declining income.
So, Shakeel, if you allow me, there is a fallacy in the narrative, which it does not distinguish between productive credit and loans you take to, for example, to pay old debt or consumer, trade balance problems, because you do not, but you build infrastructure to improve the productivity of the economy and enable it to produce more wealth.
Yes.
And that's not taken into consideration. They consider the infrastructure projects like the ports, the railways, as a liability rather than counting it as an asset.
Yes, that is happening. That is happening.
Yeah.
Because, that was, I think, very timely intervention. Because that is happening. When they were doing it, they were portraying it as a development projects. But when somebody else is doing, they are saying it's a debt trap. So that is correctly you mentioned, it's a fallacy of the narrative. Now I quickly move towards the Pakistani case study. First of all, I will talk about the debt situation of Pakistan. From $112 billion, Pakistan owes $10.92 billion to Paris Club, $7.68 million to IMF will increase because we are again going through a restructuring program with the IMF around about the $6.2 billion. Then bilateral donors, $24.32 billion. And then the multilateral donors, $39.39. And the international bonds, $5.3 billion, but no, it has touched the level of the $12 billion. I just gave you a few examples. So this is a debt situation. From $112 billion, Pakistan only owes $6 billion to China under the Cpec projects. How much? Only $6 billion. That means 5.4% of the total debt belongs to China. No, in this context, I cannot understand from say 100% and 96.6% is very good debt. But 5.4% is a bad debt, and that's the debt trap. No, you can definitely Pakistan.
Was the money borrowed from the Paris Club or IMF or other creditors, was it used to build roads, railways, power plants?
Some part, but most of the time it went to some other adjustments to repay. For example, we're getting money from IMF. It's a repay. We have to repay them the loans. We have borrowed from other countries in the last few years just to repay. So initially we got something good, but with the passage of the time, you know that what is the strategy. Give the peanuts on the development sector, rest you have to took into your care. So that is the situation. Now come to Cpec. When we were talking about in my context, I was talking about a few areas. If any investment,
the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
So if any investment which is happening and bringing the 5-6 areas, the benefits of the country, that means it's not a debt trap, rather it's daily required. So let's analyze now Cpec by putting the glasses of those indicators. Number one, during first phase, Pakistan got 85,000 jobs till 2030. That means 85,000 jobs mean 85,000 family who need a job, especially during the infrastructure building, road and other infrastructure. So there was so many unskilled labor. So they got jobs and that they got a decent livelihood. And other thing, even during the COVID-19, the Chinese company did not shed off the Pakistani employees. That was a big help during the COVID-19. Second, 100+ SMEs benefited from the first phase. That's been more indirect jobs. Then road, by building the road ML4 and other roads in Sindh and Balochistan, so travel time reduced, accessibility increased. For example, by ML4, by building ML5, connecting it towards to the Faisalabad and to the Khanewal. It led towards the reduction in the time from Islamabad to the Bahawalpur, which usually take more than the 10-12 hours. You know, if you're driving on that and you can travel, it will take only 7 hours. From Bahawalpur side, if some cotton, because that area is called Bahawalpur, Himyar Khan, and Khan, these areas, they are famous for the cotton production. And Faisalabad is famous for the textile industry. Now the time has been reduced. The time which has been taken 8 to 9 hours from there to Faisalabad, now it's take only 4 to 5 hours. That is a huge reduction. That means the cost of production will goes down. Definitely, if there are less cost of production. Now the Gwadar port, which we have completed, it's a new hub of the connectivity. And it is also the center of the connectivity with other initiatives. I have written an article today where I will share with you. So how it can be connected to the middle corridor by Turkey, how it can be connected to the Herat railway by Iran and Afghanistan, how it can be connected toward the ITI, Islamabad, Tehran, and Istanbul railway line, which I spoke the other day with Hussein on your seminar. So it can be connected to BCMI. BCMI is a Bangladesh, China, Myanmar, Indian corridor. That is another corridor of the BRI. Due to the India, it is not progressing well, but it will. So it is a new way of the connectivity. And it is also not only for Pakistan, it has enhanced the economic opportunities for Afghanistan plus Central Asian states, because they will get the priority connectivity from Pakistan through the Gwadar port to the sea. It will bring a new,
I have just a question, maybe you will come to that yourself, but many of the projects China is building in Pakistan, they are not financed by loans. These are direct investment, are they?
I'm coming to that. In my last slide, I will show that, the breakup of the Cpec financing in my last slide. And then electricity. In 2014-15, Pakistan was facing the loss of $4 to $5 billion due to the electricity load shedding. Through the Cpec investment, we built the infrastructure which is helping us to avoid that loss. And the last one, fiber optic and digital terrestrial multimedia broadcast connectivity in the digital economy. So look at these all 6 areas. They are helping the economy to expand, enhance the productivity, lower the cost of production, and also generating financial resources which can be used to repay the debt of other institutions and countries which Pakistan owe at this time, and Pakistan is facing the problem. Now look at the future benefit. I will run quickly through that because as I already seen that real income infrastructure due to the BRI. So due to infrastructure till 2030, 8% there will be a real income increase. If it is supported by reforms mean if you make our environment more business friendly, our environment more friendly towards the trade, domestic and the external, it will bring the real benefit for us, the welfare gain and the poverty reduction, 1 million up to 2030. And if Pakistan also count the side effect of BRI, there will be the 4 million people who will come out of extreme poverty in Pakistan till 2030. So export can increase by 9.8%. Factor return on the different, you can say the cost factors of production would be 10.81% for the case of Pakistan. And major beneficiary of this factor of returns would be unskilled labor. It will be around about 20.3% for them, the rate of return. If you look at the literacy rate of Pakistan, that is around 58%. 32% population of Pakistan is uneducated. And if you look at from 58%, it also includes the madrasa students and the people who can write and read their name or some article. So there's a huge population which is unskilled and uneducated. It will also take care of them. And the fourth, the poverty, 1.1 million people. Again, it will bring out that. So breakout Cpec portfolio. That is the most interesting part of my presentation to debunk. If you look at the statistics, the total investment till to 2030 would be, the total investment at this point of time, which has been completed, are in the pipeline, are in the process, which Pakistan and China are going to sign soon. That is 39.365 billion. That is the investment, keep in mind. Second, grants, 1.32 billion. Come to the debt. That is only 6 billion up to now. It can become 12 billion up to 2030. That's why I wrote 6 plus 6. No, you can analyze yourself. If you're looking at the breakup of the investment, that is an investment program. If some program is an investment program, is led by the investment, which is not a debt, I think I need to go to school again to learn the terminology, how it can be a debt trap. The school being run by the people who are running this terminology. If something is not a debt, how it can be a debt trap? And that is always shocking for me. Rather, if you look at these all investments, which I have mentioned in the benefit section of Cpec, that means they are helping us to generate the financial resources, which we can use to pay back the debt of other countries or institutions. In this context, I justify the topic, which I always advocate. It is a debt trap, debt relief diplomacy. More specifically, I can say an investment which leads towards debt relief. Something which leads toward the debt relief. That's mean it is actually a debt relief diplomacy, which is being misquoted by, you can say, people. I don't know for what reason. Maybe Hussein can make us more understand about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good term. Maybe we should use this debt relief diplomacy.
Sorry, what you said? I could not hear.
No, this new term you have coined, debt relief diplomacy.
Yes, that's
why I always like that.
Maybe some people don't like it, but I feel the investment are helping people to get out of the debt trap. So, according to from my understanding, it is a debt relief diplomacy.
Yeah. And the last slide you have.
Yes, I have one slide. You spoke more about it. I just want to show this. You can say that this graph, the Sri Lankan debt.
Okay, that's
so. Look at that. 47% belongs to the market. 10% only belongs to China. If it is 13% to ADB, 10% to Japan. Okay, if you are saying like the 10% is a debt trap, why not the Japan fall in this country, in this category? Actual problem, as Hussein, you have pointed, I will not talk about it. It was a market loan they were taken on very high rates. I will conclude by just saying the same, you can say the analysis can be applied to other investment of China in Africa, in Latin America, and otherwhere in the Middle East. So how the Chinese investment, I'm again and again using the word investment, because these are not a debt. That is very small proportion, very negligible portion, as in the case of Pakistan, from the 53 point, total is $53.3 billion, which we have agreed right now.
But even the credit part is invested, is used for productive projects. It's not
productive project, and these are on very concessional rates.
Yes.
The loan we are getting from China, that is not more than a 2 and 2.5%.
Okay.
Very concessional rate. Even for MLN, it will be even more lower. Right. The railway project. So these are investment plus debt. They are productive in the nature.
Yeah.
And are helping to expand economy and productivity.
You made the point very, very clear, Shakeel. I thank you very, very much for these explanations, because that also takes us now to the next point about the real debt trap. How debt traps are set up, real ones, not the fake one, which we have just discussed. And Dennis, you have had an experience since the early 70s. You have been following the economic and financial matters of Ibero-American countries specifically, but you have also other countries, but Ibero-America, who have been suffering from this. It has nothing to do with China or the Belt and Road Initiative. So we would like to learn something from your knowledge of these matters, which can explain for our audience how these debt traps emerge.
Sure. Thank you very much, Hussein. And Shakeel, thank you for your presentation. I think you've pointed to this underlying difference of the productive use of credit or investment as distinct from speculative use of credit or debt, which is really the debt trap. And that fundamental distinction is something which is something that people like to pretend doesn't exist. They don't even recognize that there is a difference between speculative and productive. Even using statistics of GDP mixes the two together in a way which is completely unscientific. But this whole issue of the debt trap, I mean, this really is a case of the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, this is an expression which is, I was just thinking, I was looking up, I Googled this to find out where did this expression come from? It means complete hypocrisy. And what Google says is that the saying of the pot calling the kettle black comes from the early 1600s, when most pots and kettles were fashioned from cast iron, a material that acquires streaks of black smoke when heated. So, I mean, that's what's going on here. The people who were the masters of the debt trap, who created debt traps on purpose, they destroyed nation after nation. Then turn around and point to something which is not a debt trap, and they say, oh, that's terrible, you're engaging in a debt trap. Let me point to a couple of examples of this and then get to some of the underlying reasons for this. Let me begin with there we go, a graph of Brazil. Now, this is the statistics taken from the World Bank of Brazil's debt and interest payments between 1980 and 1998. In other words, 19 years, almost 2 decades. This is the height of the debt bomb, the debt crisis in the countries of Ibero-America. Brazil is the largest country by far economically and geographically of the region. And if you just look at this, they had a total foreign debt, this is the foreign debt, the external debt, of $72 billion in 1980. Over the course of the next 19 years, they paid in interest alone 146 billion cumulatively.
That's
Only interest.
the columns. The columns are debt repayments or interest.
Right, exactly. The red curve is the total debt. The column is the cumulative interest paid. So they started with 72 billion in debt. They paid 146 in interest and loans, and then at the end of that period, their debt had risen to 231 billion. So this is what I call banker's arithmetic. You start with a debt of 72, you pay 146, and you end up with a higher debt of 231. They paid the debt, the original debt, twice over in interest only. Now you could say, well, but the new debt was used for actual investment, and therefore that's why the total debt grew. And so, but it wasn't used for that. Hypothetically, it could have been. It was not used for that. The new debt was used exactly as Shakeel was referring to. It's used to pay off earlier debt or capital flight, which is a very important aspect of this. In other words, the money comes in on one side and it's stolen and it flees the country. It hardly even stops to say hello. It does not touch ground. It does not develop infrastructure. It is not used for ports. It is not used for connectivity. It's not used for anything. It goes into the banking system and is stolen out of the banking system to repay the same international speculators.
It sounds like the Greek debt bailout from the European Central Bank a couple of years ago, when the money was transferred from the European Central Bank to another bank in Germany or in Europe. It didn't even reach Greece.
Exactly. It doesn't even stop and say hello. It just is gone the second it arrives, because that's why the new debt is issued. So this is actually a typical case. The Brazilian case is not unusual. Here is the case of Mexico and bankers' arithmetic in Mexico, more or less the same period, 1980 through 1996. Again, World Bank statistics and official Mexican government statistics. They began, the curve of is their total official foreign debt in 1980 with a debt of $57 billion. They paid that debt 3 times over in interest payments alone. Forget repayment of principal. Forget amortization, that was additional. This is interest payment alone. 3 times over, and at the end, their debt was 180 billion. So again, 57 minus 150 equals 180 billion. Banker's arithmetic. And in the case of Mexico also, absolutely did not go to anything productive. It simply was part of the game, this speculative bubble that was built up, much to the destruction of the actual Mexican economy. And that's how that worked. Now, if you say, well, maybe this is something that was just happening in the 80s, but it's not really what's going on today so much, well, no, it's actually much worse. Although the category, I should say, of foreign debt or external debt no longer can be determined the way it used to be possible to look at this in the 1980s, where there was dollar denominated debt and then there was domestic debt denominated in local currencies. But that distinction vanished at the point where in the 90s, the entire world economy was turned into a single roulette game where all domestic currencies were almost everywhere, because exchange controls and capital controls disappeared. So all of these domestic debts were immediately convertible into dollar or euro denominated debt and payable that way. So the distinction between domestic and foreign vanished under a supranational banker's dictatorship. However, if you look at the situation of Argentina today, and this is directly related to the China question that both Shakeel and Hussein have been referring to, this is the picture from 2012 to 2019. The vertical line is where the government of Macri came in. He was in the government from 2016 through 2019. He was a banker's boy completely. And what he did, the Argentine foreign debt was about 190 billion in 2016. It rose by almost $100 billion over the next 3 or 4 years in 2 ways. The first year was a $40 billion increase, borrowing on the international markets. The debt jumped up. Then they got an IMF package. Yeah, we'll talk about the IMF in a minute. An IMF package worth another $45 billion to supposedly strengthen Argentina's finances. The total debt is raised by about 100 billion. From June 28th, 2018, when the IMF loan came in a little bit after that, but before the IMF loan, Argentina's reserves were $48.5 billion. The IMF loan of about $50 billion came in, and Argentina's foreign reserves in September of 2019, over a year later, were exactly the same that they were before the 50 billion came in, $48.5 billion. So the debt, I mean, this is pretty amazing if you think about this for a second. They have $48 billion in reserves. $50 billion comes in. You'd say, whoa, well, they're at least going to build up their reserves from 48.5 by another $50 billion. No, the reserves are exactly the same. Well, where did the money go? It came in and it went out. Capital flight. Who engages in capital flight? Local and international financial interests that use these financial flows as a way of looting the economy. So the country gets indebted by another $50 billion. There is nothing to show for it by way of development or projects. And instead there's capital flight out of the country, which loots it and turns it into.
But there is also there's a price tag, which is in the form, I mean, this money is not just given to the country like this to help, but there are conditionalities added to the package. As I saw when 2018, when I was looking at the Pakistan case study, Pakistan was negotiating with the IMF around its $90 billion debt, but they were looking for a $12 billion package. One of the conditions the IMF put forward is that the Pakistan should not invest any money in infrastructure projects, like 200 billion rupees should be slashed from the government's plans for infrastructure.
No, that's exactly right. And that's really important because people have a misconception also many times about the IMF. They say, well, everywhere that the IMF has been active, whether it was Pakistan or whether it was Brazil or Nigeria or wherever, everywhere that they've been, they've destroyed these economies. The IMF method is a failure. I disagree. The IMF method is a success because the purpose of what they're doing is exactly that destruction. The debt and the collection of the debt is not the primary objective of these banking interests. That's not what they're most interested in. They're using the debt as an instrument to make sure that no development actually occurs. The reason it produces underdevelopment is because it is meant to produce underdevelopment and looting and destruction. And the IMF conditions, what you were just saying, is exactly the way that it's done. The purpose of the indebtedness is to get these countries addicted, to turn them into like a heroin addict, and to then use that addiction to this speculative flow of money to destroy them. And so you have IMF success stories like the genocide that has been done in Mexico or Argentina or Pakistan or Nigeria. And that's exactly their intention on this thing. So this conditionalities thing is at the center of the whole issue. Now, let me say one other thing before going into my broader concluding point, which is people look at this banker's arithmetic and they say, wait a minute, how is that possible? How can this possibly be? I don't understand how you can have a situation where you pay your debt 3 times and yet it grows by 2 or 3 times. It's very simple. The people who control the game are the ones who do this, and they do this basically in 2 ways. If you run the casino, if you run the roulette table, you can do this, and they do. They do 2 things. Number 1, by forced devaluations. Through capital flight, they just financially destroy a country, and they force a devaluation. So let's say, for example, that you owe $100 billion when the value of your currency is, let's say, 1 to 1, right? 1 rupee to $1, let's just say. A forced devaluation that takes you from 1 rupee to 2 rupees to the dollar means that it will cost you twice as much domestically in terms of actual production to repay the debt. So if you control the financial mechanisms and you engage in financial warfare, loot countries, control the risk assessment agencies, and then impose a devaluation, forced devaluations on these countries, and I won't go through all that history. It would take me 3 or 4 days to list all of these cases of forced devaluations. That's one of the tricks by which they create a situation where the more you pay the debt, the more you owe. There's a second way they do this, and that is by forced control over the terms of trade, where the price of your exports drops and the price of your imports goes up. That's called a change in the terms of trade. Who controls the terms of trade? The market? There is no such thing as a market or free market. It's run on the Rotterdam Exchange. It's run by who controls the price of gold, the British, who controls the price of iron ore, the British, who controls the price of all the raw materials. It's run by international cartels. So it's like a devaluation. They run the game. And therefore, forced devaluations and forced changes in the terms of trade means that it becomes more and more expensive to your domestic physical economy to pay the debt, which is growing and growing. There's only way out of that debt trap, and this is a real debt trap, and that is to put an end to the entire game. It's a rigged game. It's a rigged system. And the objection to China is not that they're lending money, it's that it's a different game. The Chinese are not playing this game. It's a totally different system. And if you offer countries like Argentina, for example, the alternative of actually engaging with China in productive activity, which is what is about to happen, because the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, is traveling to China in May. He is going to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Belt and Road Initiative, which Argentina does not have. The 3 big countries of Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, do not have a memorandum of understanding with the Belt and Road, but they look around the world. They look at Pakistan, they look at Cpec, and you can be sure they've studied these matters. They look at what's happened in Africa, and they say, and they look at the poverty reduction in China, and they say, these are countries where in Argentina, the breadbasket could be, with the pampas and so on, the breadbasket of the region. 50% of the Argentine population eats in soup kitchens. They could be producing food for 400 million people. 50% need government help to eat in Argentina because of this looting process. And they look around and they see China and they say, well, look at the poverty. If China could do it, why not we? So there are two games here. One is the banker's arithmetic and the real debt trap, and the other is what is being with the Belt and Road. In conclusion, the debt problem is not the big problem. What we've been talking about here is extremely serious. It's life and death for countries in the developing sector, but it's not actually the big problem internationally, because the debt, as large as it is, and Shakeel was just citing some statistics of 237 trillion internationally, or some number like that. It's about that. That's very important. It's the way countries are made and destroyed. But if you look at the world financial system, that is only a very small part of the total financial aggregates. This is a graph here. These are actual numbers taken from BIS statistics that Executive Intelligence Review and the LaRouche movement have elaborated on. If you look at the green part of this curve, that's the debt. It's 200 and some odd trillion. The valuation of the stock markets, which is another part of the financial aggregates, is another 150 trillion, something like that. But if you look at total world financial aggregates, it's about $1.8 quadrillion. The lion's share of that, 85%, are financial derivatives, which is pure speculative activity based on absolutely nothing, based on covering earlier losses. That's what a derivative actually is. It's a way of doubling your bet to cover your loss. And so we have a global speculative bubble of 1.7, 1.8 quadrillion dollars. One part of it is the debt, but the debt is also like the fuse on a bomb. If the debt goes off and it can't be paid, yes, the debt is a big explosion, but the derivatives is a much bigger explosion. So we are now looking at a situation of the bankruptcy of the international financial system, the transatlantic system, where this is Lyndon LaRouche's famous triple curve graph, and it's probably the best pedagogical explanation of why this kind of speculative system cannot last. You have here the growth of the financial aggregates, which is what we just saw, growing exponentially. You have the simple monetary aggregates, which is the issuance of currency, quantitative easing, and so on, which is now increasing more rapidly than the rate of increase of the financial aggregates. But underneath that, the actual physical economic production of the economy is collapsing in the West, in Europe and the West. And you cannot maintain this system in that form for very long. You do not have to be a rocket scientist to understand that you cannot maintain a growing speculative bubble of close to $2 quadrillion when your physical economic base is collapsing. That's what happened in 2008. The so-called measures to solve the problem only made it worse, with more quantitative easing of about $30 trillion to try to solve this problem. Now that the quantitative easing has run its course and it's not helping, they have invented a new bubble. It's called the green reset, which is about the same size, another 30 to 50 trillion of pure speculation, which has also the effect of destroying the physical economy further by lowering the technological platform back to the Middle Ages. And we will have the level of population of the Middle Ages or worse if this policy is adopted. So what we're looking at here with this whole debt trap argument is actually a life and death issue over the future of the entire planet. And everyone is faced with two alternatives. You either go with the Belt and Road and that entire alternative, or you sink and you destroy with the transatlantic financial system.
Yeah.
We're encouraged, we think, in the LaRouche movement that there are real possibilities of the entire world shifting into a new paradigm of development and growth and burying once and for all, yes, the debt trap mythology, but the entire system which created that mythology. This is a burial that must occur, and this time there should be no Lazarus. Nobody rises from the dead.
Yeah, I hope we have made it clear. I think nobody of the, what I mentioned all these reports which clearly debunk the China debt trap myth, but nobody has done what we have done today, is that we showed that there is a real debt trap, which is detrimental to most of the planet, and that there is a way out of that, of course, which brings me to the concluding part, which I think that there should be a way out of this. I mean, we are not saying that we divide the world, everybody should go to China, but I think it's very important that the United States and Europe, this is one of the principles of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, is that we do want cooperation between the United States, Europe, the EU, with China and other nations to have a new international economic model for economic development based on, as we discussed today, credit for infrastructure, for scientific research, for agriculture, and so on and so forth, where all nations can actually benefit and participate in. So if you just want to ask you just very, very briefly, 1 minute each, what do you think we should go from here? We can start with Shakeel.
Okay. I think, as you said, we just need to work more on how to build the cooperation. The cooperation would be the key area to determine the future of this planet. Because if we are just trying to divide the world in the poles, it will not serve the purpose. We have to move towards the cooperation. And as Hussein, you are talking about, we need to merge partnership. It's not only China. If you look at the BRI, 140 countries. So that's mean US, Canada, and the European Union country, they need to also work with these 140 countries. It is not alone China. So that's mean if we really believe in a globalization on the basis of equality and the welfare of everybody, and we want to achieve a sustainable development goal, the slogan, no one left behind, we have to cooperate, not to blame each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakeel. Dennis?
Yes, absolutely. I'm an American. I live near Washington, and the interest of the United States as a country, as a people, is exactly that kind of cooperation with the Belt and Road. The United States is not Wall Street. The United States is not the city of London. The real United States is the United States of Washington, of Lincoln, of Franklin Roosevelt, and of Lyndon LaRouche. It is a United States which was built on the premise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not just for Americans, but for the entire world. And that means a system of economics which will make that possible. There is nothing that would be more in the interest of the United States than exactly this kind of cooperation. And in that regard, one of the things that we are doing is looking to the upcoming visit of the Argentine president to Beijing to join the Belt and Road, for Argentina and Mexico to work together to propose for the entire region that China and the United States must cooperate specifically in the development of what is the immediate area of the United States, Mexico, Central America, South America, and so on. If we want to solve the problems of migration, if we want to solve the problem of drugs, the only way to do it is by developing the region. Same applies to the Southwest Asia and so on. So I emphatically concur that that is the direction in which the entire planet has to move.
Thank you very much on these wonderful thoughts. We come to the conclusion of our podcast for this week. I thank you very much, Shakeel, and also Dennis, for the wonderful
Thank you.
Thoughts, but also the incredible amount of information you have provided to our audience. I hope this debt trap narrative is now buried, and we can go further into making sure that nations work together for economic development and prosperity and peace around the world. So thank you for watching this podcast. Please follow the series of podcasts for this year we have been producing You can find also the link to our website on below the video. So thank you very much, and see you next week in a new podcast. Bye-bye.